You didn't ask for it. You didn't do anything differently. You just opened the mailbox one day and there it was. A letter from your landlord. Rent is going up. Maybe it was $100 more. Maybe it was $200. Maybe it was enough that you sat down and did the math 3 times hoping the number would change. It didn't. And the part that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it is that you're not behind. You're not irresponsible. You haven't been spending carelessly. You've been paying on time every single month without exception. You've done everything right. And it still went up. That moment, sitting with that letter and realizing the number is just different now, that's not a personal failure. That's a pattern. And it's showing up in mailboxes across the country right now. Not in one city. Not in one type of neighborhood. Everywhere. Rent didn't just spike during the inflation period and settle. It kept going, quietly, steadily, month after month after month. And the gap between what rent costs and what most people actually bring home has been widening longer than most people realize. This isn't about one bad lease renewal or one difficult landlord. This is about a shift that has been building for years and is now showing up in budgets that have no room left to absorb it. That's what this is, and that's what we're going to walk through. Rents are still rising, not at the pace they were during the peak of the inflation period. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development projects median rents in 2025 to be nearly 5% higher than they were in 2024. 5% sounds moderate until you realize it's landing on top of the increases from the year before. And the year before that, stacked increases on a number that was already higher than most people were comfortable with. Current rent levels sit roughly 35% above where they were before the pandemic. 35%. That number stopped making headlines a long time ago, but it shows up every single month when the payment is due. And this isn't just a story about expensive cities on the coasts. More than half of all US states have seen rent grow by double-digit percentages over this period. It's everywhere. Small cities, mid-sized markets, places that never used to feel expensive. The lease renewal letters are reflecting that across the board. People who have been in the same apartment for 2 or 3 years are opening renewals and finding numbers that look nothing like what they signed up for. And the instinct to just move somewhere cheaper isn't working the way it used to, because the new listings are priced at the new market rate too. There's no version of the same apartment somewhere nearby that didn't get the same increase. The whole market moved together, which raises the question most people are sitting with right now. Why did it move this far? And why isn't it coming back down? The most straightforward explanation is also the most accurate one. There are simply not enough places to rent. Economists estimate the US has a housing shortfall of as many as 5 million homes. That shortfall doesn't resolve quickly. Building takes time, permits take time, construction takes time, and in the meantime, demand keeps pressing against a supply that can't keep up with it. When demand stays consistently high and supply stays consistently limited, the price moves in one direction. But the supply problem is only part of it. Landlords absorbed significantly higher costs during the inflation period too. Property insurance went up across the board. Maintenance and repair costs went up. Property taxes in many markets went up. And those costs got passed down the same way they always do, into the rent. A survey of rental property owners found that nearly 80% plan to increase rents in 2025. Not as a coordinated decision, not out of collective opportunism, just individual math. The cost of running a rental property stayed elevated even after inflation slowed, and the rent had to reflect that. Then there's the layer underneath all of that. High mortgage rates locked millions of people out of buying homes entirely. One poll found that 86% of renters said they wanted to buy a home, but simply couldn't afford to. That kept an enormous number of people in the rental market far longer than they intended to be. People who planned to buy stayed renting, which added even more pressure to a market that was already stretched thin. More demand pressing against the same limited supply. Prices move up, and they stay there, because nothing in that equation has changed enough to bring them back down. And the people absorbing all of that are the ones with the fewest options and the least room left in the budget. That's where this lands. This is where the data stops being abstract and starts being personal. The number of renter households spending more than 30% of their income on rent and utilities has hit an all-time high. More than 22 million households. That's not a small group living in unusual circumstances. That's a standard experience for renters across the country right now. More than half of all renter households in the United States are now considered housing cost burdened. And it's not just the lowest income earners feeling it anymore. That's what shifted. Renters earning between $45,000 and $74,000 a year have seen their cost burden rate nearly double over the last 2 decades. These are not people in financial crisis. These are working households with steady jobs and consistent paychecks. People who are doing what they're supposed to do, and rent is still eating a larger share of what they bring home every single month. What that looks like in practice isn't one dramatic moment. It's a slow accumulation of smaller ones. It's the savings account that isn't growing the way it was a year ago. It's the choices that quietly get smaller without a formal decision to make them smaller. The weekend trip that gets pushed back. The purchase that sits in the cart and never gets checked out. It's opening the banking app in the middle of the month and feeling that low-level tightness even though nothing actually went wrong this month. Because when rent takes more, everything else has to compress to make up for it. Groceries get tighter, discretionary spending shrinks. The things that used to feel like normal parts of life start to feel like decisions that need to be justified. And that compression doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It just settles in quietly as life feeling harder than it used to. Harder to get ahead, harder to feel like progress is happening, harder to explain to someone else because nothing specific broke. Everything just costs more and there's less room than there was before. But rent isn't doing this alone. And that's the part that makes this harder than a simple housing cost problem. Here's what separates this from a typical housing affordability story. Rent isn't rising in isolation. It's rising on top of everything else that already went up during the inflation period and never came back down. Groceries are still sitting significantly higher than they were 3 years ago. Utility bills are still elevated. Insurance costs have gone up across nearly every category. Car insurance, home insurance, health insurance, all of it adjusted upward. Every major line item in a household budget shifted higher during the inflation period, and none of them reversed when inflation slowed. So when rent increases by $100 or $200 a month, it isn't landing on a budget that has space to absorb it. It's landing on a budget that has already been compressed from every other direction. That's the part that never shows up cleanly in a single headline. A rent increase of 5% sounds manageable on its own, but 5% on top of a grocery bill that's still 30% higher than it was, on top of utility payments that adjusted and stayed there, on top of insurance premiums that went up and didn't come back down. That's not the same 5%. That's a completely different weight on a budget that was already carrying more than it used to. All of it stacks. And the cumulative pressure of everything stacking simultaneously is what creates the feeling people are walking around with right now. The feeling that they're falling behind even though nothing specific happened. Because nothing specific did happen. No single catastrophic event. Just steady pressure from every direction at the same time, month after month. And it's that steady pressure that explains what so many people are quietly experiencing right now. This is why it feels like you're losing ground, even when you're doing everything the same way you always have. It's not one thing that went wrong. It's rent going up, on top of groceries that didn't come back down, on top of bills that adjusted higher and stayed there, on top of wages that for most households didn't fully keep pace with any of it. The math just doesn't balance the way it used to. And that's not because something went wrong in your life specifically. It's because the baseline shifted across every major category of daily spending at the same time. And rent, the single biggest line item in most household budgets, kept moving upward after everything else had already settled at a higher level. More than half of all renters are now spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. That number keeps growing, not because people are making worse decisions, not because renters suddenly became less responsible, because the cost of staying housed keeps claiming a larger share of what people earn. Every year, without an announcement. That's the pattern. That's what's actually happening underneath the surface of the numbers. You're not falling behind because you changed. You're not falling behind because you did something wrong. The cost of staying exactly where you are went up, and it's still going. If this connected with something you've been feeling lately, drop a comment below. A lot of people are experiencing the same thing, and most of them think they're alone in it.